Every now and then, the internet loves to freak out about something that doesn't really deserve to be freaked out about. This time it's DLC at the Game Awards being nominated for Game of the Year. And by every now and then, I mean all the time. And normally these things pass within the month, a week, hell, days even. And I don't make videos on them because it just doesn't make sense for the content that I post to YouTube as infrequently as I do. And goodness gracious, people are losing their minds over Shadow the Erdtree being nominated for Game of the Year to an extent that I was not really expecting. People are saying that it sets a horrible precedent for the industry and it's going to ruin the Game Awards in the future, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Now, generally I agree that DLC and remakes should have their own categories and they really shouldn't qualify for a Game of the Year, but it's not a hill I'm willing to die on, and I think there are some severe overreactions to Shadow the Erdtree being nominated for Game of the Year. So that's what I'm going to discuss in this video. Hey, Danny with the DMGT here, your new favorite place for all things music, gaming, and tech. Okay, so DLC, the Game Awards, Game of the Year. There's a ton to dissect here, so let's start at the top, the Game Awards. Let's start off with what the Game Awards says about themselves in their About page. It literally says, the Game Awards recognizes and upholds creative and technical excellence in the global video game industry. We bring together a diverse group of game developers, game players, and notable names from popular culture to celebrate and advance gaming's position as the most immersive, challenging, and inspiring form of entertainment. We strive to recognize those who improve the well-being of the community and elevate voices that represent the future of the medium. I think this is mostly a load of baloney. Don't get me wrong, I do enjoy watching the Game Awards, and I'm sure Geoff Keighley works really hard on setting up the award ceremony and bringing all these different companies and game studios and publishers together to talk about video games. But in reality, the Game Awards is a marketing showcase. It is a show online to advertise upcoming games. Whether or not that's the intent for the Game Awards doesn't really matter in this case, because what we effectively get year over year is a show with a bunch of trailers for new and upcoming games, new announcements. The whole global announcement, first time ever you're seeing this announcement, is really the focus of what it's become over the years. That's what people tune in for and what determines whether or not people like the awards show or not. And not from users online like you and I potentially engaging with this video. I'm talking about the average gamer. Are they going to rate this a success or not? Really depends on whether or not you got a new GTA 6 trailer. And while there are hundreds of gaming outlets and studios that show up to these awards, and there are awards handed out, there are actual trophies and statues handed out at the Game Awards, and games are celebrated, that is not the primary focus of its 3-hour runtime. The vast majority of the focus is on trailers, on new games, and things we haven't seen before, rather than a proper year and look back at the year that gaming has had. Now, it is a little hard to argue with what Geoff Keighley is doing with the Game Awards because the viewership numbers continues to grow year over year. I do think that's partly due because of the growth of the gaming industry overall, but it also is hard to argue with the numbers to say, hey, Geoff Keighley, change the formula, when he can point back and say, hey, the viewer numbers keep going up with the way that we've been doing it, so I don't know what you're talking about. Now, do I think that's part of what's holding back the Game Awards from really becoming the Oscars, Emmys, Grammys of the video game industry? Maybe, but some would argue that it's unnecessary and we don't want to go in that direction. I have mixed thoughts on that, but I do like seeing or having a night for celebrating video games and its entertainment form, because I do think it's one of the best art forms in our times. Okay, so that's a lot of yapping about the state of the Game Awards. What does this have to do with DLC, Shadow the Erdtree being nominated for Game of the Year? Everything, really, because as cool as it is to have a night to celebrate video games, it's questionable whether or not it really matters at the end of the day. And I'm not saying it doesn't matter in the sense of like, oh, you shouldn't care about, you know, your work being rewarded and you're receiving accolades for developers putting in work and receiving an award for their game that they worked on. I think that part of it is very cool and does matter. The fact alone that so many video game companies, publishers, developers, and then outlets outlets such as your IGNs, your YouTube channels, hundreds of outlets literally vote and attend these awards. Like, it's not an insignificant thing to be nominated and to have like your favorite game nominated for a category. People say, oh, it doesn't matter, Game Awards, who cares? It's not like the end all be all. And while that's kind of true, there is a little bit of legitimacy behind it because of the amount of outlets that Geoff Keighley has brought together in order to nominate and award these categories. But I mean, it doesn't matter in the sense that a game winning or not winning or being nominated or not being nominated for any category or award doesn't really impact your ability to enjoy said game, if that makes sense. Now, it is nice to get a little bit of validation to say, hey, you should check out this game. Look, it got nominated. Look, it won this category. You should really check it out. That sort of adds some additional weight behind opinions and recommendations of video games. But a game winning Game of the Year doesn't determine how much fun you're going to have with a game. There are plenty of games that I enjoy very deeply that never get any sort of nominations. And to really loop this back around to the DLC and the remakes, I think when something is done so exceptionally well that all of these outlets and all of these people with different opinions and taste in video games decide that, hey, this was actually as good as a standalone video game this year, I think there should be room to allow that, even though I do prefer their own categories. I think an outlier situation is generally a good thing. That means something really was exceptional and we as gamers win. There's no loss there. Now, as for any concerns for what it's going to set a precedent for the industry, I think that's just absolute bananas. The Game Awards doesn't have that type of influence because there are so many hands in that pot. There's no needle being moved as far as the monetary side of things. We've already seen this over the years. The only thing that moves the needle is gamers buying or not buying something. And for the vast majority of gamers, they're not paying attention to these types of things. Just like your average moviegoer doesn't really care about the Oscars that much. For aficionados and people that really love the medium and the formats, they pay a little bit more attention. But even then, they'll say, oh, well, the way that voting happens with the Academy is like kind of weird and a little outdated, and they're not really nominating movies that deserve it. Part of the problem, and I mentioned this in a video that I made about how we're using review scores and rating scores incorrectly, is that these awards, especially when it comes to online conversation, are just really used to weaponize, hey, my opinions, say, hey, my thing won Game of the Year, the game that I prefer, so you're an idiot for liking the other thing. It's like, that's not what this is about. That's not how this should be used. It's more of a celebration of a game, not a knock to anything else that was put out there. And I do think that the Game Awards is uniquely positioned, different from like the Oscars or the Grammys, in a way that we have some more insights into how the voting and what the jury looks like for selecting nominees and winners for their category. They're literally listed out on the Game Awards websites, all the different companies, websites, outlets, publishers that vote on the Game Awards. We have that level of insight. So it's really difficult to say, hey, this doesn't matter when so many outlets that people do view and go to are contributing to the awards. There's a little bit of insight there, and there generally is a consensus on what the best of the best was in any given year. So the concern that, oh, it's just going to be DLC in years moving forward, I think vastly overestimates the influence the Game Awards has in how publishers and developers make games, and it also vastly overestimates how much DLC comes out at this quality, how many remakes are made at this quality. That's just not what happens. Activision Blizzard, for example, Call of Duty makes $1 billion every single year. Same thing with Rockstar with GTA 5 Online. Every single year, they're clocking in $1 billion. They're making money hand over fist. Do you think they care that they're not nominated for Game of the Year regularly? You think they care that their games aren't nominated for a bunch of different categories that stack up against some of the smaller, quote-unquote smaller games, even though some of those are AAA as well? No, they're racking in that cash regardless. This is part of the reason why I like that the Game Awards isn't majorly fan-voted, because that just becomes a popularity contest, and I like that most of the weight of the Game Awards is valued by outlets and reviewers that dedicate time to playing video games exclusively, and that's like their full-time job. And of course, there's going to be some level of bias that, you know, some voices that stream really loudly on the internet are going to be like, bias, and they're being bought out. But that's not even a concern that I even think about either, because with the amount of people that are involved in the Game Awards, if publishers and game companies were giving out money, which, by the way, would not make any sense because, again, it doesn't really push the needle on the sales front, the thing that these AAA developers really care about, the studio heads really care about, that would leak. If that would leak so quickly with so many hands involved in this voting and nominee process with the jury, that would leak overnight. People can't keep secrets. Are you kidding me? You involve hundreds of organizations. That's just not what's happening. I think people have this idea, or like having this idea of a boogeyman in their gaming because it's so precious to them. But it's like, you're taking this award too seriously. If your game doesn't win, you're almost taking it like a personal insult, which is not what it should be. Now, that's the fault of gamers, I will say, again, because they're weaponizing these awards. But the DLC being nominated here isn't going to ruin the Game Awards moving forward, because of everything I just said. Publishers and developers don't really care that much. The individuals, I think, should absolutely care, and I think they are definitely worthy of being celebrated. But there are so many other things to address with the way the Game Awards is run at present, that DLC being nominated for Game of the Year, while yeah, I think it should be addressed, it's so low on the list of priorities versus, hey, what about last year? Kojima and Michael Peel were Key and Peele. One of them. Oh my God, I'm forgetting his name. I'm leaving this in. Had like minutes of runtime. They were just kind of like goofing off on stage, which is cool and all. But then you have developers, indie developers, that get 30 seconds for their speech to accept an award. Some of them don't even get broadcasted. They don't get televised. They just happen 1, 2, 3, 4, boom, boom, boom. Here's the award, because we're making so much space for either celebrity appearances that really don't have anything to do with the games that came out that year, or some performances, which I enjoy. Some of my favorite artists will perform at the Game Awards. Those are things to address first before we address, like, hey, this DLC is potentially taking a spot from like a smaller developer. I just don't see that argument really holding that much weight, because that's been happening for forever. And for the most part, games that are getting nominated do deserve the nominations. There has rarely been an instance where I look at a nomination like, why is that there? It doesn't make any sense to me. There are disagreements that I have with nominations, but then ultimately those 6 are like, yeah, these are all really good games too. And a nomination, it's not like you get consolation prizes for your nomination. If something really gets snubbed, the gaming industry and the community takes care of it by saying, hey, this thing got snubbed. You should look at this. And the people that care and really want to play games that are different to what they're used to, they will go out there and they will play it. I don't know. This is a ranty video about a topic that's just been sitting on my brain for a bit, and I didn't script this like I normally do, but I felt like I needed to make a video out there to, first of all, to get people to walk off the ledge. The gaming industry is going to be okay. The Game Awards doesn't have that type of pool. We should just recalibrate how we approach the Game Awards. It's just for fun. It's mostly just for fun. When we get to a point where the Game Awards is 75% about the actual awards and about the year we had, and only 25% about new games and trailers and new announcements, then maybe we can revisit this conversation. But until we get there, even, I think we're screaming about something that doesn't exist. All right, well, I have a bunch of videos that I have to get to on the music and tech side, as well as game reviews that I haven't gotten to yet. The Game Awards is coming up, so you look forward to my yearly why so-and-so won Game of the Year. It's going to be Astrobot. So look forward to that. I got to get that scripted out and ready to go. Eventually, I'm going to touch on the plague that is anti-woke gamers making content on YouTube and tricking all of you into thinking that there's some agenda happening with gaming. And I don't know, man. I gotta make sure I have that properly scripted out and not just off the cuff like this video is, because it's a little bit more serious, and yeah, it really gets me up in arms. Woke games are, man, those people are really annoying, so I gotta make sure I address that properly to get people to listen. Okay, anyways, if you like this video format, let me know. If you hated it, also let me know. Thanks. Subscribe. Bye.